Ancient civilizations. Well, maybe not ancient civilizations, but certainly people in ancienter people in ancienter places than we thought existed before. That is the article that we have today. I'm going to talk about the article. Then I'm going to talk about why we might not be finding as many uh, why we might not be finding as much evidence that these people existed as we would hope. And then I'm going to talk about some reasons why we might not have the evidence of civilizations where these people were. So the question is up front, if these people were where we are finding evidence of them having been, were they just people? Or did they belong to actual civilizations? Were they hunter gatherers? Were they wanderers? Were they nomads? Or were they actual people existing within the parameters of a civilization? We have an article titled Archaeologists. So, real quick, I apologize for stopping again. I've noticed that I'm talking a lot about archaeology on the channel lately, so I'm going to make a playlist for it. This video will be in that playlist here, as well as all of the other archaeological discoveries, recent archaeological discoveries that I have talked about on the channel. In an article titled Archaeologists Found 23,000-Year-Old Human Footprints Where They Shouldn't Exist from Popular Mechanics by Elizabeth Rain, we get the following. Here's what you'll learn when you read this story. I like these types of recaps, but forecaps, if you will. Researchers determined that footprints in the White Sands National Park in New Mexico are from the oldest migrants to North America. How do they know it's from the oldest migrants? These are far and away the oldest. This is far and away the oldest evidence we have, but that does not mean these are the oldest people. The footprints first made headlines after the study published in 2021 claimed that they were thousands of years older than the Clovis people of New Mexico, who had long been thought to be the first North American culture. Who these nomadic people were, or whether they stayed in New Mexico or moved on, is still unknown. An endless ocean of white sprawling across New Mexico's Tularosa Basin, White Sands National Park glitters with dunes of gypsum sand. From those sands have surfaced footprints that would rewrite human history. Found in ancient clay that has long since hardened to stone, the footprints were thought to be anywhere from 21,000 to 23,000 years old. Controversy surrounded the finding. If these tracks really were that ancient, it would mean that they were even older than the Clovis people from the Pleistocene, whose name comes from a site in New Mexico that was thought to be the oldest known settlement in North America. Whether or not these tracks really did predate the Clovis culture would be debated for years until the investigation was reopened. Archaeologist and geologist Vance Holliday, now a professor emeritus at the University of Arizona, started researching the geologic strata of White Sands in 2012. In 2019, researchers from Bournemouth University in the UK teamed up with the US National Park Service for the excavation that resulted in the discovery of the footprints, and some of Vance's data on the ages of seeds and pollen in the area was used to date the prints for a study published in 2021. If the age of the footprints was correct, that would make them 10,000 years older than the Clovis people. Skipping a little bit forward in the article here. The issue of the first arrival in the Americas has long been contentious, and the record from the White Sands locality generated considerable debate focused on the validity of dating, he said in a new study recently published in the journal Science Advances. So the ways that are used to sort of date things has always been a point of contention between people who think that things are older than they are dated and people who think that things are younger than they are dated. The people who think that things are younger than they are dated are normally might be the wrong word here, but usually, I guess, probably is the better choice of words, religious fundamentalists. So people who don't think that the earth could be, that people could have been around 23,000 years ago, because they think that the earth is only 6,000 years old. So there are things, there are anomalies that have happened in these types of dating that fundamentalists will often point to. I'm not sure where I stand on the argument with a lot of these. I don't understand uh, a lot of these dating, a lot of the science behind dating. I don't understand dating at all. But I don't understand the science behind dating some of this stuff anywhere near as well as I should. But there are so few actual samples of things to be dated that it does make me question the efficacy of it a little bit. The age of the footprints coincides with the final phase of the Pleistocene epoch, otherwise known as the last glacial maximum. Ice sheets that blocked the Bering Land Bridge between Asia and North America made human migration impossible. Did it? Did it really? This could potentially mean that the first people to settle in North America crossed over the Earth over before the Earth plunged into a deep freeze, a period which aligns with the age of the footprints as confirmed by Vance. Now, one of the interesting things about this theory and why we don't have more evidence of those cultures is that where would those people have had to live? And would they have been sustainable? It is possible that human life in the Americas could have been sustainable only via trade. Now, it is very unlikely that that is the case, because trade was not entire ships full of supplies, right? But what if there was a technology, a spear tip, for example, that would have been absolutely necessary for hunting the types of animals that, maybe not hunting the types of animals that were in the Americas, but defense against some of the animals that were alive in the Americas. And we're going to look at a few in a moment. But if, for example, there was some weapon that was, and this is hypothetical, extremely hypothetical, right? But you had to have trade with a specific culture with whom trade was possible before the climate changed. The climate changed. Trade with that culture is no longer available. You can't get the defense weapons, the defense mechanisms anymore, and all of a sudden your civilization falls because it is overburdened by the wildlife of the area. What is now the Tularosa Basin was once the bottom of a paleo lake called Lake Otero that formed after the snow and ice melted. Flows of melted snow brought dissolved gypsum to Lake Ontario, which emerged as an expanse of white sand, and the lake evaporated into the dry playa. Erosion needs a little bit of lotion. Erosion may have erased some of this history forever, but beneath the sand, fossils of megafauna like mammoths and ground sloths were preserved alongside the controversial footprints. Now, what if that area also had evidence of a culture or civilization? Not a grand civilization, not a civilization with computers and steel, but a civilization, a settlement. Whoever made these prints traveled through marshlands before Lake Otero formed and walked through gley, mud that is too waterlogged for oxygen to penetrate. Organisms in the mud instead turn to iron and manganese compounds in this mud to survive. Chemically, during breaking down these compounds and turning the mud shades of blue, green, or gray. The gley was radiocarbon dated to anywhere between 20,700 and 22,400 years old, supporting previous findings that came to that range. Before this, Vance had relied on pollen remnants and seeds of the aquatic plant Rupia serosa, also known as spiral tasselweed or ditchgrass, to date the impressions. At the time that the human tracks were created, there was an extensive body of standing but shallow water or wetlands in proximity to the trackways throughout the period of human activity, Vance said. If this is if this is proof of what could be the first humans who migrated to the Americas, then why did they only leave footprints? The absence of artifacts might be explained by nomadic life. Vance thinks that one of the great trackways was easily walked over in only seconds, and hunter gatherers might have only been passing through the basin while holding on to tools and supplies that were not easily replaced. Who these enigmatic people were remains a mystery buried in the sands of time. Well, what if some of those large land mass changes caused by glacial events, caused by climate changing, etc., took out where these people lived? What if where these people lived is now covered with water? All of these things are possible, but we don't ever get to talk about them because we don't have evidence that they existed. So why don't we ever find evidence of these people? Why don't we have more of their bodies? Why don't we have more of their stuffs? Well, let me introduce you, if you are not familiar, with some of the animals of the Americas from that era. This is a glyptodon, a massive shelled creature who, by the way, could run 27 miles per hour. This tank of an animal, this is to scale, could run 27 miles per hour and had a giant shell on it. It wouldn't take too many of these to absolutely demolish your body, no matter what they ate. So I have not looked into the glyptodon. I don't know a whole lot about these animals. I'm just familiar with the way they look, really. Maybe this thing just ate plants. That would not stop it from killing the absolute snot out of you if it felt that you were a threat. So, yeah, that would demolish bodies in minutes. And there are certain um, only under certain circumstance will fossils preserve. So, will bodies preserve? So, it would be very unlikely if too many of these things were picking over you that you would be preserved. This is a terror bird. Now, I believe this terror bird is from a little bit before the actual era that we're talking about, 23,000 years ago, when they were a little bit bigger. I believe the terror birds that would have been concurrent with these people are slightly smaller, the head in this space. I could be wrong. Terror birds, by the way, also looked like this. This is the terror bird that I think would have been contemporary with these individuals. Terror birds had a top speed of 30 to 50 miles per hour. This was a legitimate raptor. These would have eaten you and destroyed every bit of evidence. Next, dire wolves. This is the size of a dire wolf. Dire wolves, you may remember them from the news, have recently been Jurassic Parked, have been brought back into existence. And from what I understand, this the basically mane around its head, they didn't know that that was part of the animal because obviously you don't have too many you don't have any of their fur on most of the bodies of dire wolves that you find preserved in ice or whatnot. And I don't think there would be any preserved in ice because anyway, I might be wrong about that too, so I shouldn't run my mouth. But look at the coat, how rugged the coat is on this wolf. And this is the size of this wolf. Yeah, going to be very, very difficult for you to survive an attack of dire wolves. So there would be no evidence left of you except for footprints miraculously preserved in stone. They ran 30 to 40 miles per hour. And then there is the giant ground sloth. Now, this depiction of the ground sloth is bigger than I thought they were. Maybe, probably, I am wrong. Look how big that is. Sloths, contemporary sloths, are kind of nasty creatures. So we have every reason to believe that these massive creatures would have been just as nasty to deal with as sloths today. So, talking about why we don't have any signs, why can't we talk about civilizations in the Americas at this time? Because we don't have any evidence that they existed. Well, why might we not have evidence that they existed when really they did? Well, building materials were likely to have been wood. Maybe there were stones involved as well, but largely you're talking about wood, things that are biodegradable. And uh, they wouldn't have lasted. They wouldn't have lasted that long. But B, there has been a lot of climatic change in the Americas since 23,000 years ago, which would have made that wood even less durable, or I guess would have broken down the wood even faster because of all of the climatic change. It's also possible that the civilizations may have been smaller in scale to allow for more mobility, and because farming would not have been vital to survival because of constantly quote unquote green environment. You wouldn't have to store food. There would be food available regardless of the season in some of these climates, in some of these areas in the Americas. It was told to me in my college days that one of the things they used to say about North America, not just South America, where you're thinking about all of the great rainforests, North America in the times of the original 13 colonies. They said that you could, and obviously this is just an anecdote, it's not meant to be taken literally, but they said that you could set out a squirrel in New York, and that squirrel could make it to California without ever touching the ground. That's how much coverage there was. They said that the topsoil in the North American region was, I think, 8 feet deep. I think that is what they would say. I think that is anomalous. I am not 100% sure, but it was a ridiculous amount of topsoil that was available in North America. The environment of even North America was way more dense than we think of when we think of the Great Plains, etc. There's also the possibility that in many of these areas there is a lack of archaeology. Under the rainforest in South America, no archaeology is going on, but we are still finding massive settlements from just hundreds or a couple thousand years ago that have been reclaimed by the jungle. We're not talking about hundreds or a couple thousand years ago. We're talking about 23,000 years ago. And there's not really, to my understanding, been a whole lot of archaeology done in North America because the assumption is just kind of there's nothing here. There's the places in which you get grants to do archaeology. You're getting granted to do archaeology because they're pretty sure you're going to find something. They're pretty sure you're not going to find anything in most of North America, and you're not going to get grants for most of South America because how are you going to get through that jungle? So there's just a lot of space that has not been excavated. And I think that there are probably multiple civilizations that LIDAR will end up finding in the Amazon, but we don't have those right now. There's also the possibility that those great big animals we just looked at preempted a lot of attempts at civilization. Now, I think that as interesting as Egypt is, for example, and I think that Egypt is older than they say it is. I think that civilization in that area of the world goes back further than they say it does, then we have evidence that it does. Now, to be fair, they're only saying that because that's what we have the evidence for, right? The great untapped archaeological finds are not in Egypt. They're not in Europe. Probably there's some in Asia. Probably there's some in the Middle East. But I think that there are going to be heads spinning when they find out some of the stuff that has gone on in the Americas and how early it was going on. The human story seems to be one of never ending curiosity. And we have had the same hardware for a very, very long time. Is it that hardware which compelled us to be on the move? And if it was, just how long ago did we know about the quote-unquote new world? That is all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other people interested in these sorts of things. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, I cover lots of different stuff on this channel, and I hope to have you back for the next one.